Hi, everybody. So tonight I'm going to talk to you about the recent Virginia governor's election. And I'm going to talk about this because, first of all, I live in Virginia. And second of all, I think that this upset win with Republican Glenn Youngkin beating out Democrat Terry McAuliffe is one of the biggest things to happen to the Republican Party since Trump won the nomination in the election in 2016. And the reason for that is that the Republican Party has sort of been stagnant for a very long time, or really since the 2020 election. And now there seems to be an injection of hope, of a possibility of winning again into the Republican Party. And that is in large part due to Glenn Youngkin's surprise win in Virginia. But just to start off, I want to dispel a couple myths and kind of rumors here. Glenn Youngkin was not somebody that the big names of the conservative movement cared about. He was not somebody that the people you see on Fox News all the time cared about. He was not somebody who was particularly interesting to the professional social media people of the conservative movement. He was not somebody who was going to be on major podcasts with your favorite commentators. That wasn't what was happening. What Glenn Youngkin is a local guy trying to win, in his mind, a local election, meaning a statewide election. And that really separated him from a lot of other Republican candidates that have run in the last couple of years. We've had this influx of grifters come in and try to win seats so that they can have higher name brand recognition, or simply run for political office to gain name brand recognition. That's just a fact. We've seen that across the board with people running in seats that are plus 70 for Democrats, or even in seats that are plus for a little bit for Republicans. That has been a problem. But Glenn Youngkin didn't do that. What he did do was shun the entire framework of how we thought the modern GOP and conservative movement operated, which was to go on all the major Fox News shows, to engage with the social media conservative influencers, to have all the sort of tacky taglines and talking points, and most of all, to go on hands and knees to Trump and beg for endorsements and beg for support and beg for all of that. He didn't do any of that. Instead, he went to local events. He asked people how they were doing. He talked about a couple issues, but not a lot of them. And he really focused on trying to become the next governor of Virginia, which now, of course, he will be. And the reason why that's so shocking is that other Republican candidates have not been doing that. It has not been their focus to win the seat. It's been their focus to use the process of trying to win the seat of the nomination to become famous, either for an eventual other run for office or just to become a figure within the conservative movement. Glenn Youngkin didn't do any of that. He actually wanted to be governor. That was what he focused on. Now, with him doing that, with him being sort of a small-time candidate in terms of how he was operating in the conservative media world and the conservative movement and GOP, Terry McAuliffe decided that the way to try to destroy him, and for those of you who don't know, Terry McAuliffe was his opponent, a former Democrat governor of Virginia, massive guy in the DNC, worked a lot with major figures of the Democrat Party over the last 20 years. Terry McAuliffe decided that because Glenn Youngkin was not going to be photographed with Trump at every 5 minutes, he was going to try to paint Glenn Youngkin as a horrible human being. And that is what has gone on the last few months in Virginia. This was not a nice election. If you watch the news, if you watched any show at about 7 o'clock, you would see back-to-back ads from the Democrats and Republicans showing, Glenn Youngkin would say, I'm going to help you with the economy. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. This is what Terry McAuliffe said about education. Whereas Terry McAuliffe pretty much labeled Glenn Youngkin everything but Satan. That's really what went on here. And what was so shocking was it wasn't just on TV. Terry McAuliffe decided to go all scorched earth. These are some flyers or mailers that came to my house. Glenn Youngkin would allow domestic abusers to buy a gun. Glenn Youngkin, too dangerous for Virginia. This is law enforcement saying this in Virginia. This was Terry McAuliffe's strategy, if you will. He went full-blown negative. He was merciless. And it wasn't just him. Other Democrats running against Republicans in the state, especially the attorney general's race, they took McAuliffe's lead and they got clobbered, especially the person running in the AG race for Democrats. Now, on the flip side of that, Youngkin didn't do that. He sent mailers like a better future or a brighter future. This was his strategy. He did not add to the fire of the conversation, whereas McAuliffe decided to put out things like, so when I heard Glenn Youngkin opposes vaccinations for teachers and masks for kids, he lost my vote. None of that happened. But this is what McAuliffe put out. He put out flyers. showing Glenn Youngkin basically as somebody who was unfit to govern, but not because of his policies, but because he was evil, because he's a horrible human being. That was what Terry McAuliffe did. And some people watching this might say, well, that's politics, everything's negative. Not like this, not like the last few months in Virginia. And nobody really covered it in the conservative movement because no one thought that Glenn Youngkin was going to win, including me. I didn't think he was going to win. But what Glenn Youngkin weathered, the storm that he weathered pretty much, that Terry McAuliffe threw at him through advertising, was enormous. Look at this. Glenn Youngkin would have raised $10 billion in public school funding. That's not true, but this is what Terry McAuliffe sent out. Bad thing after bad thing. Glenn Youngkin's budget plan. There was lots of black ink and big symbols of danger that McAuliffe put out. And the reason for this is because Glenn Youngkin did something that Republicans have not done in a very long time. He was a nice guy talking about the issues that people care about. And it sounds shocking when you lay it out like that, but that's something we haven't had in the Republican Party in a really long time. I want you to think back to the 2018 midterms and the amount of candidates running solely on knowing Donald Trump, who was, of course, president at the time. That was what the platform was for lots of these people. And in some ways that paid off, people like Josh Hawley, but in a lot of local races, in a lot of races that were really just about the state apparatus, it didn't work. And that is something Republicans need to take into mind in 2022 and beyond. Because Glenn Youngkin, to me, at least in political strategy, kind of the leader of the Republican Party right now. He is who new candidates or candidates who are up for re-election in tight races want to go to find out how to get reelected or to win. So with Glenn Youngkin pretty much, in my mind, being the strategic leader of the GOP right now, if he wants that job, it's important that Republicans understand if you go in with this doom and gloom thing, if you say over and over, Democrats are evil, terrible communists, stop the woke agenda and everything, if you only lead with that, you're going to suffer the same fate as Terry McAuliffe, because Terry McAuliffe did the reverse of that. He did all of that, actually, except he did it on his own behalf, on the Democrats' behalf, and he got clobbered. Look at this one. Glenn Youngkin's vision for Virginia schools is behind these doors. These are the types of mailers that Terry McAuliffe set out. Glenn Youngkin is putting politics ahead of our kids. When you only campaign negatively, when your entire image is based off of trying to destroy the character of people who a lot of people like, you lose. And that's what's happening right now. And people will say you don't necessarily lose. You do lose. You lose when that's all you've got going for you. And that's one of the reasons I'm making this video tonight, because I am concerned that the Republican Party is going to try to take over Glenn Youngkin's victory. And what I mean by that is they're going to try to tell you why it happened. And they're lying. They're going to lie to you about why it happened, because it didn't happen because of Donald Trump. It just didn't. That's just not the reality. There was, I think, one mailer sent out. I think this is from the Youngkin campaign, one of those that came out, and it was basically saying, I'm endorsed by Donald Trump. It is what it is. Thank you for the endorsement. That's what got sent out. Terry McAuliffe sent out all sorts of mailers saying Glenn Youngkin is endorsed by Trump. He's a radical. He's terrible. He's a Nazi. He's all these things. That was what happened. So Trump did not seal this election for Youngkin. That's just a lie. So that you need to know that, first of all, but you also need to know that while education played a massive role in the election of Glenn Youngkin, it was the number one issue. It was not the only issue. There were other things at play here. So when the Republicans and the GOP and the RNC tell you that the whole reason Glenn Youngkin was elected was because of school boards, that's not true. I'd like it to be true, but I'm in Virginia and I'm telling you that's just not the case. Glenn Youngkin was elected because of education, but he was also elected because of taxes. He was elected because the Democrat Party was the party of doom and gloom. Something has obviously happened in the political system where voters don't want doom and gloom. And the Republican Party is very good at doom and gloom, a little too good. So when you see these operatives from the GOP and the RNC saying Glenn Youngkin's so wonderful and we understand why he won, they don't understand why he won. They have no idea. They didn't even really have an apparatus ready to defend the results of the New Jersey gubernatorial election if a Republican won. So why on earth would you think that they were going to tell you the truth about why Glenn Youngkin has won this gubernatorial race? It's just not the case. And I think, just in closing, a really important point to understand is that Glenn Youngkin won by being what I think the Bush election of 2004 was in a lot of ways. He was talking about serious issues, but he was a nice guy. He was tough, but he was a nice guy. In a lot of ways, he kind of pulled a vintage Bush too. I mean, that's kind of what happened here. So when Trump tells you that that Glenn Youngkin won because of his endorsement, that's not the case. When the Republican Party tells you that Glenn Youngkin won simply because of the issue of education, that's not the case. Glenn Youngkin won because he shunned the grifters that have been all over the conservative movement for at least the last 6 years. Glenn Youngkin won because he didn't run a social media campaign. He went and spoke to people. Glenn Youngkin won because he let people ride on his bus and sign their names. And he went and spoke with people, and he went outside and he worked really hard. Glenn Youngkin won this campaign because he wanted to. He won the election because he wanted to be governor of Virginia. So in the run up to 2022, in the run up to 2024, you need to understand, if you pick candidates, if you endorse candidates, if you let candidates govern the GOP who don't actually want to win the race they're running in, they will not win. That's just the reality. And if you do that, you are also giving the Republican Party, or really giving away one of the last shots the Republican Party really has to not be seen as the party of evil, as it is by many, many people across this country, especially young people. And if you're an adult watching this, I want you to understand, if we can reboot the Republican Party to be a little less doom and gloom, to tap into the fact that people want joy and happiness right now, and to feel like that nice guy who coaches soccer could also run their state or their country, you need to not listen to the grifters. Don't listen to the grifters, because that's not what they know. They know doom and gloom. They know telling you all sorts of crap about how all anybody cares about is what's on Fox News. That's what they know, and they're very wrong. What we do know is that if you want to win, if you want these to be the results for you, of Youngkin with 50.7% and Mcauliffe with 48.5%, you need to pick real candidates, and you need to talk about real issues other than the ones that Kevin McCarthy wants you to talk about. Because I'm in Virginia, and I'm telling you, as much as we want to talk about Afghanistan, it didn't matter here. What mattered here was taxes. What mattered here was actual infrastructure for roads. What mattered here was education. But most of all, what mattered here was a Republican who actually was a decent guy all the time. That's what mattered here. So these flawed candidates who are nasty behind the scenes, who have an attitude, who are mean, who lie about, the stability of their families and everything, that's not something we can run with anymore. People need to be vetted, and you need to make sure that when you pick a candidate going forward, it's someone who actually wants to win the race that they're running in, as baffling as that sounds. So thank you, everybody. Please retweet this, share this, and comment your thoughts below.